So we went through covenant, Lord, and here another key word that is very well associated with Al-Rahman is the word remembrance. Do this in remembrance of me. Anyone? Okay. Surah 21:36, we'll start. By the remembrance of Al-Rahman. Then we see in 21:42, say, who shall, and then this is a blank word by Murad, presumably, by night and daytime from Al-Rahman, rather they are averting about the remembrance of their Lord. Again, we have Lord Al-Rahman in association, but here very crucially remembrance. Now in Surah 26:5, remembrance from Al-Rahman, again an association. 36:11, whoever followed the remembrance and was timid of Al-Rahman. The remembrance of Al-Rahman, again in 43:36. So, like I was spilling the beans on the right off the gate, right? The remembrance, right? So there's two things in the New Testament that are related to remembering/remembrance. So we have the Holy Spirit who will be a reminder of all things. And then also we have the Eucharist, which we are told by Christ to do this in remembrance of him. So, is the remembrance of Al-Rahman the Eucharist?
To me, certainly it looks that way. Every time that I have seen these verses and I have seen remembrance, I do not associate the word remembrance with Islam. From all of the hadiths and seerah and stuff that I have read, it's not there. You are not. I know that there are these verses. We are actually reading them about the remembrance, but it's not like they have an act. It's not like it's something active that they need to do, like in the actual command from the Bible to do this in remembrance of me. Like the remembrance thing just always makes me think, well, it's Christianity. Like Islam, they don't. They just have it in there in the book, but it doesn't seem to be as a core thing as you would have if you're thinking the five pillars of Islam or zakat or something like this. It's like, no, that's us. That's what we do. Or going on the pilgrimage to Mecca to lick a stone. That's what they do. But when you're thinking remembrance, is like, yeah, that's Christianity. So when we look at this word and it keeps appearing with very closely together with Ar-Rahman, which, as I have said already, I think 5 times by now, it appears a lot in Surah 19, which is Miriam, is like, yes, the authors, they had something very clear in their heads when they were writing this of who Al-Rahman was and what the remembrance of Al-Rahman actually was. It looks clear, I think.
Yeah, and they say remembrance, right? What remembrance is there in Islam? I would say none, because seemingly, from my perspective, there's a new Islam every 100 years. So they don't even remember what Islam was a century ago, before the 1924. Yeah, so here we're looking at Surah Maryam just as a visual indicator to show you how packed and how used Al-Rahman is, and not in Al-Hayyin declarations, as in the Al-X, Al-Y at the end of verses, but it's used very much as a standalone name, proper name, for a particular subject. We're not going to read through this. We've went through a couple of these verses already, just to show you as an indicator, visually, how packed and how used Al-Rahman is in contrast to, let's say, every other surah. Like in here, we see in just the section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 is actually the max amount in any other surah. So in 19, we get it 16 times? 16 times.
Yes.
So yeah, it's very clear that Surah Maryam is heavily associated and packed with Al-Rahman.
Yep. And no Ar-Rahim, no nothing else. It's only Allah, Lord and Creator, and now Ar-Rahman that appears in this way, that it is used as though you would know exactly what it's talking about. If you listen or you read the word Lord, you know what it is, and so on. But here is just a name, more than a title, is something that they would immediately recognize. And we've seen in the inscriptions from the South Arabian region that it was an actual name pretty much used here and there. And the way that they actually sounded, it was more about a name. People would recognize the character by that. It was not an adjective. If you are saying, I don't know, the one who hears all is like, well, that's a very descriptive thing, and you would know that this is talking about God. But it seems to be used as a name. And I think this also shows that very clearly. It keeps going again and again, using, if you replace that with a name, just replace it with a name, just for fun, maybe, I don't know, Jesus, and see what you get and see what you think. But it seems to be quite revealing, particularly being in Surah 19, Miriam is seventh time or 10th time. I don't know. I've said it a few times. Anyway, and I
Yeah.
think this is
So
the last one.
yeah,
And the
we're
last
gonna
slide, yes,
go
with
through a couple of these verses, right? So you'll start, I suppose.
yeah, let's actually we try to go like one by one, but they are just some honorable mentions. We have actually extracted all of them, as I mentioned before, but there are lots of them that they just don't tell you anything. It's just saying, well, Al-Rahman, whatever, and you look at it, you don't know if it's talking about. It doesn't have any keywords basically. So this one, the first one, Surah 19, verse 58, goes blah blah blah. We had guided and collected when the signs of Ar-Rahman are being iterated. Now, signs or ayat, that is translated as signs, but it can also mean other things, including verses, miracles. It is something that people have seen. Now, going with this thing that we're putting forward, that Ar-Rahman was just yet another name for Jesus that people will associate in that manner. This would be, when the miracles of Jesus are being iterated to people, they're just telling, and people would understand what it was being spoken of. So something basic like this. Next one for you.
We see in 19 again. It's all 19, isn't it?
Yeah.
1961, the gardens of Aden, which is Eden. They just have a difficulty pronouncing things. Which Al-Rahman has promised his servants. This one is amazing to me because in the Old Testament, let's say the more so Allahian conception of a, you could argue, even though the Old Testament is Trinitarian too, frankly, but you could sort of argue, okay, this is Allah, and this is the one monad God, and he promised his servants Eden. Okay, makes sense. The only problem here, it's a big problem, is that the Old Testament never promises anyone the garden. In fact, and let me just sort of see here a little bit in specifics. The Old Testament, the garden is seen as something that is lost due to sin. So in Genesis 3:24, we see he drove out the man, Adam, right? So it was cast out from the garden, and the promises made in the Old Testament are about the restoration of the actual the wilderness. For example, in Isaiah 51:3, we see he will make her wilderness like Eden. So Eden is used in sort of like a reminiscence, like, okay, we're kicked out of Eden, but the wilderness is gonna be made like Eden. Like the world will be like the kingdom is. It's that kind of language. The promise itself in the Old Testament is not of the garden. The promise given in Genesis 15:18 is, to your offspring I will give this land, the land of Canaan. That's the promise. So the servants are not given the promise of Eden by what one could say as being the Father or the Allah of the Old Testament. Instead, the promise about the garden is made in the New Testament. So one great example, everyone knows this, is in Luke 23:43. We read, today you will be with me in paradise. The word here in the Greek is paradisio, right? It's a word for garden. It's the Greek word for garden. So the promise about the garden for his servants is not made by, and I don't like this phrase, but the God of the Old Testament. It's the same God, right? But the promise itself, in terms of like where we can find that promise made in textual material, is only made in the New Testament. By who? By Christ Jesus of Nazareth. So therefore, who is Al-Rahman?
Look, it's in Surah 19. That is a shock. Uh, but if we think about, okay, so Ar-Rahman, let's think it can be Yahweh, can be Jesus, can be Allah. And then you read that whole sentence. The only one that actually fits is Jesus. With the Old Testament, is like, it doesn't quite fit like this. And when you think about Allah, it's like he, well, they think that he promises a garden because it says here, but when you then read the hadiths and what they think they are getting, it's not a garden, it's a brothel. So there is that big problem. When you read this, there's only one that actually matches this description, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to restate it. The gardens of Aden, which Al-Rahman has promised his servants. So Al-Rahman promises the gardens. Old Testament, no promise of gardens. New Testament, explicit promise again and again of gardens. What is being referenced? Clearly, New Testament. In the New Testament, who makes the promise to his servants about the garden? Jesus. Who is Al-Rahman? Jesus. Simple.
It's very simple. And the next one is something we had discussed before as well. So Surah 19, verse 96, still on Surah 19, as with everything. Surely those who believed and worked corrections, Al-Rahman will soon render them fondness. And it's like, okay. So we've seen this in Surah 47, verse 2, the one where it's saying, those who believed and worked corrections and believed by that which was made to descend upon Mahmat, and then it, which can be translated as he, is the same word, he is the truth from their Lord. He amended their conditions and he removed their sins and amended their conditions, something like that. So it's talking about that past event. We've seen this. In here we have part of that sentence again. Surely those who believed and worked corrections. So it's talking about those who did that in the past. And then instead of saying that he removed their sins and amended their conditions, he's saying that Al-Rahman is going to do something for them. He will soon render for them fondness. Is okay. So we have on the one hand Mahmad, who did these things for people in the past, and now the same act. So those who believed, we have Ar-Rahman popping in, and then in the future, soon, he will do something that sounds very much something very heavenly. So once again, it seems to be all going in circles, and it was just another title for Jesus, just like Muhammad is to this day, actually.
Yeah, and we see in Surah 25. Oh, we're finally outside of Surah Maryam. 25, 26, we read, the true kingdom today is for Al-Rahman. Here's a question. If we're talking about Allah here, why would there be a particular day when the true kingdom is for him? What do you think, JC?
I think exactly the same as you think, that qualifier shouldn't be there. If we're talking Islam in the way that we know it, it should be everything is Allah. It's always been Allah. That's it. The true kingdom has always been and will always be for Allah. But in here, there's a qualifier, meaning something must have happened. And
Right.
if today the true kingdom is for Ar-Rahman, that means that yesterday it wasn't, but today it is. And of course, you can actually imply that if it is today, it will be from today until forever. But there must be an event that happens that makes Ar-Rahman becoming the owner, perhaps, of the true kingdom, something like that.
Right, the Malik or the Malik. The true kingdom today. So what happened today such that the true kingdom is for him? And who is he? I would posit very simply, it's the purchase of the kingdom. It's the purchase through his blood. The salvation plan today in question today is the day of the crucifixion. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, or possibly even if this is being spoken out loud or written down by somebody, even in the 5th, 6th, 7th century before it makes it into the Quran, someone is saying that the kingdom is today for Jesus. What it would mean is, it's been for a while, but today is for him. He's making a distinction between how it was before and how it is now. Not necessarily it has to be on this very day. It can actually be a bit more of not an exaggeration, but making a distinction between what happened before the crucifixion and now, because you are on the other side of the crucifixion and the resurrection, you are saying today is for Al-Rahman. Uh, meaning they would understand it that you're making a distinction from what was before it. So I think both ways would make sense.
Right. Today as opposed to yesterday in a very abstract sense. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Then the next one is actually we have discussed that one before, and actually Andrew has mentioned this one as well, which is the trellis thing again. So Ar-Rahman even himself over the trellis, which is what Kash you've described before and as well in a previous video, and I'm sure we will discuss again. We've added their throne because that's how they normally translate it. And when I'm actually looking at these sentences, because they appear in quite a few places, I do think that it is, or it may have been like firmament or the actual throne, but it doesn't really matter. Even if you go completely with the translation as it is, it would still make sense because there is this whole imagery of Jesus sitting on the right hand side of the Father and the throne being his and the earth being his. So it would still make sense. I mean, when we dig deep and we look at the word and it's a very Christian imagery, that's even better. But even if it was throne, it would still actually work. Also, when we see that the creator, as believed by the people who wrote the Quran, was Jesus, when it says that he did things and then he was in the heavens, it still makes sense. It's still talking about him doing things and then having being in the heavens. So it all actually fits. And this is certainly what the writers of the Quran were telling people. They were saying the things that Jesus was, except that, of course, they got it very, very wrong in many cases. But the Al-Rahman doing these things make more sense about Jesus than otherwise.
Okay, then we have 2563 as our final honorable mention. We read the servants of Al-Rahman who walk over earth in debility. And when the ignorant ones addressed them, they said, peace, shalom. We see here, well, I'll finish reading it. The end of the verse is in the. Oh no, this is not necessarily the case. So we're gonna just speak on the verse here. So here we see that we have the subject of question here are the servants of Al-Rahman, and what are they doing? They are walking over earth in debility. Okay, and what are they confronted with? They are confronted when the ignorant ones address them saying shalom, peace. Who says shalom? That would be the Jewish people. So the Jewish people here are being considered the ignorant ones, at least a certain subsection of the Jewish people. And who are the servants of Al-Rahman who walk over earth in debility? Walk over earth. That's pretty grand scale. Who could have possibly in history, as a group of people who were servants of a particular Al-Rahman, what group of people went around, let's say, to India, to here, to there, to everywhere, spreading the gospel? I spilled the beans. It's the disciples, it's the apostles. They're the ones who were sent out by Christ, the Lord, to spread the gospel all over the earth, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and there are when here it says the ignorant ones, is worth mentioning that what these people probably meant is they were approaching the Jewish people, and their job of these preachers was to make them believe in the Messiah. That's why the Quran is full of Messiah, Messiah, Isa, and so on. And Ar-Rahman, we can add that one to the list as well. So this is what they are doing. For them, the Jewish people, they needed to accept Jesus, Isa, the Messiah, all of this. If they didn't, then they were the ignorant ones because they had stopped before. So it wouldn't be just, say, a blanket insult like they just hate them. Is quite the opposite. They just thought they needed to do the final step and become their version of Christianity, which of course was a heresy, but never mind. So, but it does sound like Akash has said, servants of Ar-Rahman, and then they encounter people who say Shalom, is, I think we all know who these verses were actually talking about. It certainly looks very much as it's talking about the apostles.
I would agree, very much so.
Great.
In the background, sorry, I've been trying to search because I just couldn't get it out of my mind that in the Arabian inscriptions we had a variation between one end and two ends. So I'm trying to research whether or not, Yeah, I think this is valid. It seems to be the case that I was looking at how earlier it just came to mind because I think it's the Aramaic that the n suffix, as in having an extra n, acts as the diminutive. The diminutive, like little, like ito in Spanish. You know, cantarito, a little singer or whatever. That's the name of a colleague of mine. So to have Rahman and have Rahmanan, potentially we have Rahman and we have little Rahman. I'm just putting that out there for maybe someone in the audience to pick up on that and chase it down.
And we have here a comment from Andrew. So these servants are the litter bearers who beat the trellis litter throne. They're walking carefully over the earth, so they do not disturb the rider, the person on the litter. Yes, absolutely. Or is the apostles? It's one of the two, I think.
Oh, you're speaking like a Sufi, Andrew. I don't quite understand you.
Oh, well, we will have some things to say about some of the Sufi traditions, I think, at one point. But for now, we are just continuing with this.